She sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, with a voice fueled not by meals, but by capsules forced on her by studio bosses. And Errol Flynn, the glorious swashbuckler, was drowning in rum when no one was looking. Behind the silver screen, Hollywood's brightest were ruled by their darkest addictions. Tonight, 17 tales of glamour undone, each stranger than the last. Number 1. Judy Garland. Pep pills that stole Oz's rainbow. She was 16 when MGM put her on a yellow brick road that glittered with promise and was laced with pills. Before every camera rolled, Judy Garland's smile was painted with powder, and her body jolted awake with pep pills, the studio's secret weapon to keep their stars thin, energetic, and compliant. Offstage, her small hands trembled as she lit another cigarette, her heart racing faster than the applause that followed her. At MGM, schedules were merciless. To keep Garland on set through 18-hour days, executives prescribed stimulants in the morning and barbiturates at night, an endless cycle of forced wakefulness and artificial sleep. The little girl who had once been Frances Gumm was rebranded into America's sweetheart, Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, while privately slipping deeper into chemical dependency. By the late 1930s, she wasn't eating meals but swallowing capsules, every bite replaced with a studio-mandated pill. The addiction carved its mark into her 20s, though she charmed audiences in Meet Me in St. Louis and Easter Parade. The cameras often hid a trembling body and tear-streaked face. Rumors swirled in the backlots, breakdowns in dressing rooms, fainting spells after scenes, sudden disappearances for rest cures. Yet MGM's publicity machine spun these crises as exhaustion, shielding their prized star from scandal while tightening their control. Garland herself tried to resist. In the 1940s, she sought hospital care, only to be discharged with another round of prescriptions. Marriage and motherhood offered fleeting comfort, but the grip of stimulants and sedatives was unrelenting. Her voice, once a miracle of purity, sometimes cracked under the weight of chemical strain, yet audiences clung to her every note, unaware of the suffering backstage. By the time of her 1950s comebacks, including the triumphant A Star Is Born, the addiction was inseparable from her legend. The radiant girl who had sung Somewhere Over the Rainbow was trapped in a haze of pills that blurred every horizon. Hollywood had promised her immortality, but it came at the price of her peace. Number 2. Montgomery Clift. Handsome face behind the bottle. On May 12, 1956, Montgomery Clift left a Hollywood dinner party and never returned the same. Driving home from Elizabeth Taylor's house, his car swerved into a telephone pole. When Taylor pulled him from the wreckage, his face was bloodied, jaw shattered, teeth embedded in his throat. That crash didn't just scar him physically, it cracked open a life that would dissolve in alcohol and pills. Before the accident, Clift had been the new face of Hollywood, handsome, sensitive, and fiercely method in his craft. Films like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity made him a rival to Brando and Dean. But after the crash, pain became his constant co-star. Surgeries rebuilt his face, yet mirrors reminded him of what had been lost. To endure the throbbing agony, he leaned on painkillers by day and whiskey by night, a double-edged escape that dulled both body and soul. The studios tried to disguise the change. Close-up shots softened the lines of his reconstructed features. Directors spoke of temperamental delays, when in truth, Clift was battling hangovers and withdrawals. Friends whispered of slurred speech on set, trembling hands that spilled drinks at parties, and hotel rooms scattered with pill bottles. Hollywood loved his tortured intensity on screen, but behind the lens, it was destroying him. Taylor remained one of the few who shielded him, even insisting he star opposite her in Suddenly Last Summer. But the cracks widened. His once bright eyes grew vacant, his performances erratic. By the early 1960s, his career dwindled, offers drying up as his reputation for instability spread. Doctors called his decline the slowest suicide in Hollywood. At just 45, Clift's heart finally gave out in 1966. After a solitary night at home, the police found no alcohol bottles, no pills left scattered, but the years of abuse had already written the ending. Number 3. Marilyn Monroe, a cocktail of pills and loneliness. She was the most photographed woman in the world, but in the stillness of her Brentwood bedroom, Marilyn Monroe's companions were not lovers or friends, but bottles of tiny capsules lined across a nightstand. Night after night, she reached for sleeping pills to quiet her racing mind and barbiturates to force a few hours of rest. Beneath the glittering smile was a woman spiraling into solitude, each tablet a fragile ticket to forgetfulness. From the outside, Monroe embodied the fantasy, the platinum blonde bombshell of Some Like It Hot, the playful siren who sang to presidents. Yet she was tormented by sleeplessness, anxiety, and the pressure of sustaining an image larger than life. Hollywood demanded perfection, so she crafted it, while secretly clinging to a cocktail of pills just to function between sets and appearances. Colleagues whispered of erratic schedules and sudden disappearances. Studios blamed her temperament, masking the reality that Monroe often struggled to rise from bed without chemical aid. Friends recalled late-night calls, her voice heavy with pills, confessions spilling out like unfinished scripts. Beneath the diamonds and couture, she was a woman desperate for rest, terrified of abandonment. By the early 1960s, the pattern had become ritual: a pill to wake, a pill to calm nerves, another to sleep. Doctors and enablers in her circle fed the cycle, whether out of loyalty, profit, or denial. Rumors swirled of dangerous combinations, the kind that blurred the line between medicine and poison. On an August morning in 1962, she was found unresponsive, a life extinguished at only 36. Officially, it was labeled a tragic accident, a fatal mix of pills. But the whispers of conspiracy, of secrets buried alongside her, turned her passing into one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. Number 4. Errol Flynn. Rum, women, and reckless self-destruction. He was the face of adventure, the man who swung from ship masts and dueled with flashing swords, Hollywood's ultimate swashbuckler. But when the lights dimmed, Errol Flynn's real battles were not against villains on screen, but against the bottle in his hand and the chaos of his own appetites. Rum was his constant companion, and women, parties, and scandal followed like shadows in the wake of his fame. By the late 1930s, Flynn was Warner Brothers' Arborson crown jewel, drawing audiences into theaters with Captain Blood and the Adventures of Robin Hood. His athletic grace and devilish charm seemed effortless, yet between shoots, he was notorious for wild nights that stretched till dawn. Empty glasses littered his mansion floors, and his reputation for debauchery became as famous as his swordplay. The tabloids couldn't get enough. In Like Flynn became a phrase synonymous with reckless indulgence. Alcohol, however, was not just recreation. It was anesthetic. Flynn drank through injuries, through lawsuits, through fading roles. His appetite for liquor grew so ferocious that colleagues remarked he looked decades older than his years. At 35, his face already bore the lines and pallor of a man twice his age. His voice, once rich and commanding, often slurred with drink, while directors learned to cut around his instability. Rumors swirled endlessly: hotel brawls, scandalous affairs, courtroom accusations. Each episode fed his legend, but drained his body. By the 1950s, he was cast more for notoriety than talent. Appearing bloated and exhausted, his pirate's swagger reduced to a stagger. Friends noted that he could not put down the bottle, even as doctors warned of a failing heart and liver. In 1959, while in Vancouver, Flynn collapsed. He was just 50, but coroners noted the ravages of a man far older, organs battered by years of indulgence. The public mourned the rogue who had given them Robin Hood, yet the truth was darker. Flynn had been looted by his own vices, undone by the rum and recklessness that had once fueled his charm. Errol Flynn remains a symbol of daring on screen, but off-screen his life was a cautionary tale of how excess can plunder even the greatest of legends. Number 5. Tallulah Bankhead. Whiskey, cigarettes, and midnight dependencies. She could command a room with nothing more than a husky laugh and a raised eyebrow. Tallulah Bankhead, Broadway darling and Hollywood rebel, lived as if moderation were a foreign language. Whiskey flowed as freely as her famous one-liners. Cigarettes burned one after another, and rumors whispered of late nights clouded by narcotics. To her admirers, this appetite was part of her legend. To those who knew her best, it was also her undoing. Born into Southern privilege, Bankhead's charisma was undeniable from the start. By the 1930s and 40s, she was dazzling both stage and screen, stealing scenes in Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat and bringing fire to Broadway productions. But even as her career soared, she flaunted vices that the studio system usually tried to hide. She boasted of smoking hundreds of cigarettes a day, downing bottles of bourbon like water, and turning every party into a spectacle. The gossip columns adored her. She was unpredictable, scandalous, magnetic, a perfect headline. Behind the bravado, though, Bankhead battled exhaustion, dependency, and a body slowly breaking under the strain. Whiskey numbed her nerves, cigarettes scraped her throat raw, and in darker moments she reached for stronger substances whispered about in private circles. Her voice, once rich and commanding, deepened into a gravelly rasp that became both her trademark and her curse. Directors complained she arrived late, lines unsteady, her once razor-sharp timing dulled by drink. Still, her wit cut through. "I'm as pure as the driven slush," she quipped, masking pain with humor. By the 1950s, the shine of her stardom dimmed. Roles dwindled as her health declined, yet she never surrendered her flamboyance. She performed until her body no longer allowed it, collapsing in 1968 at the age of 66. Doctors pointed to pneumonia and emphysema, but years of whiskey, smoke, and sedatives had paved the path long before. Number 6. Billie Holiday. Heroine's grip on a silken voice. She stood under the spotlight, eyes half closed, voice pouring out like smoke curling through a midnight club. Billie Holiday sang as if every note carried the weight of heartbreak, but behind the velvet tones was a body bruised by dependency, a woman fighting both personal demons and a government determined to silence her. Holiday's rise was meteoric. In the 1930s and 40s, she became one of America's most beloved voices. Her renditions of Strange Fruit and God Bless the Child searing themselves into history. But the same era that crowned her also condemned her. Touring meant grueling nights, racism, and loneliness. And in the shadows, she turned to substances that dulled the pain. Narcotics gave her momentary relief, while alcohol added its own haze. The FBI made her a target. Agents followed her, raided her hotel rooms, and ensured her name was splashed across headlines. In 1947, she was arrested and sent to prison, her voice silenced during what should have been her golden years. Even after her release, the punishment continued. Her cabaret license revoked. She was barred from performing in the very clubs that had made her a star. Yet Holiday's artistry refused to die. Audiences packed theaters to hear her sing, even as her health faltered. Her body grew frail, her voice cracked at the edges, but the emotion only deepened. She sang not just songs but confessions, every phrase dripping with lived sorrow. Fans whispered of backstage collapses, of trembling hands and whispered requests for medicine that kept her going. By the late 1950s, the years of dependency were visible. Once radiant, she appeared aged far beyond her 40-some years. Hospitalized in 1959, She was guarded by police, even in her final bed. Her legacy treated as a crime scene. At just 44, Billie Holiday's voice was silenced for good. Her enemies wanted to brand her a criminal, but history remembers her differently, as a goddess of song whose artistry rose above every shackle. Billie Holiday's life was claimed by narcotics and dependency, and hounded by the law, yet her voice remains eternal, echoing through time with haunting beauty. Number 7. Spencer Tracy. Hidden Battle with the Bottle. On screen, Spencer Tracy was the embodiment of integrity, the steady father in Father of the Bride, the principled lawyer in Inherit the Wind. The everyman audiences trusted. Off-screen, however, that stability was a carefully guarded illusion. Behind closed doors, Tracy fought a lifelong war with the bottle, a battle the studios worked tirelessly to keep hidden. Tracy's drinking began early, long before Hollywood discovered him. By the time MGM signed him in the 1930s, his reputation as one of the era's most gifted actors came with an open secret. He could not put down the bottle. Directors marveled at how he could arrive on set shaky and exhausted, only to deliver performances of uncanny depth once the cameras rolled. But those close to him knew the cost. Executives at MGM went to great lengths to protect their star. Arrests for public drunkenness were buried in paperwork. Stories of violent arguments in hotel lobbies were silenced with payoffs. Tracy himself confessed to friends that he was haunted by guilt over his Catholic faith, his failing marriage, and his reliance on alcohol to numb his demons. That guilt only deepened the cycle, each drink fueling another. Even in the 1940s, when his partnership with Katharine Hepburn blossomed, Tracy remained a man divided. Hepburn tried to steady him, but she too lived with the reality of his addiction. On good days, he was charming, witty, magnetic. On bad ones, he could disappear into binges that left his health fraying and his spirit hollow. By the 1950s, the toll was undeniable. His once robust frame thinned, his face grew lined, and his energy waned. Yet he remained a box office draw, revered for his gravitas. Audiences never suspected that much of his later work was filmed around bouts of illness brought on by years of heavy drinking. In 1967, shortly after completing Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Tracy's heart finally gave out. The world mourned the loss of a legend, remembering him as America's moral compass. Few knew how much of that image had been propped up by studio machinery, or how fiercely Tracy had wrestled with the bottle that shadowed him until the end. Number 8. Barbara Payton. Beauty burned by booze and pills. For a brief moment, Barbara Payton looked like Hollywood's next great blonde sensation. With porcelain skin, piercing eyes, and a sultry smile, she caught the town's attention in the early 1950s, starring opposite heavyweights like James Cagney and Gary Cooper. But beneath the glamour was a hunger for fame and escape that soon entangled her in alcohol, pills, and scandal, a cocktail that would consume her career and her life. Payton was discovered in Texas, where her beauty turned heads long before she set foot in Hollywood. By the time Warner Brothers offered her a contract, she seemed destined for stardom. Yet even at the height of her career, whispers followed, nights spent in smoky clubs, glasses never empty, pills slipped down between rounds of laughter. To the studios, she was both a rising star and a liability. The turning point came not in front of cameras, but in the tabloids. Her stormy affair with actor Franchot Tone led to a violent confrontation with Tom Neal, another lover. The resulting scandal, Tone hospitalized, Neal disgraced, forever branded Payton as reckless and unstable. Hollywood, unforgiving to women who strayed from the script, quickly closed its doors. With roles drying up, Payton spiraled. The parties grew darker, the drinks stronger, the pills more frequent. Police blotters began recording her name more often than marquees. She was arrested multiple times for public intoxication and disorderly conduct. Her once promising career reduced to grainy mugshots splashed across newspapers. Friends recalled a woman unable to escape the cycle. One night brilliant with charm, the next collapsed in a haze of liquor and pills. By her late 30s, Payton's beauty had faded, her health wrecked, and her finances drained. She took to writing about her downfall in a ghost-written memoir, I Am Not Ashamed, a title that read more like a cry of defiance than truth. In 1967, at just 39, Payton died in obscurity, her body battered by years of self-destruction. Once groomed to be a leading lady, she became instead one of Hollywood's most tragic cautionary tales. A starlet burned out not by lack of talent, but by the vices that fed her legend. Number 9. William Holden, the actor who drank himself to death. He was the golden boy of post-war Hollywood, rugged, charming, and effortlessly magnetic. William Holden could smirk his way through Sunset Boulevard and swagger across Stalag 17, embodying the modern leading man. But behind the charisma was a relentless thirst that no camera could capture. Holden's long battle with the bottle slowly eroded his health, his career, and eventually his life. Holden's rise in the 1940s and 50s made him one of the most bankable stars in the industry. He earned an Academy Award and became a favorite of directors who valued his naturalism. Yet insiders knew that his off-screen habits were as notorious as his on-screen success. Parties often ended with Holden deep in drink, his jokes slurring into melancholy confessions. Studios worked hard to shield him, hoping to protect their investment. By the 1960s, his drinking was no longer just a private indulgence. Colleagues whispered of missed cues, unsteady performances, and directors forced to shoot around his condition. His handsome face grew weathered, his once bright eyes dimmed. The man who had once represented vitality now carried the look of exhaustion. Though he still landed major roles, including in The Wild Bunch and Network, the cracks in his image were undeniable. Friends urged him to seek help, but Holden brushed them off. Alcohol was his constant companion, a comfort in loneliness, a shield against the pressures of fame. He never shook the habit, even as it cost him relationships and tarnished his once shining reputation. His longtime companion, actress Stephanie Powers, later spoke of a man unable to put down the bottle despite knowing the danger. In November 1981, Holden's story ended with a chilling irony. Alone in his Santa Monica apartment, he suffered a fall after an evening of heavy drinking. Too weak to call for help, he died in silence, his body discovered days later. William Holden had once been Hollywood's embodiment of strength and vitality, yet his downfall was as human as it was tragic. A leading man undone not by scandal or crime, but by the slow, merciless grip of alcohol. Number 10. John Barrymore, the tragedy of America's biggest drunk. Long before Hollywood crowned new matinee idols, John Barrymore stood as America's greatest stage and screen actor. Dubbed the Great Profile for his chiseled features, he was equally revered for his Shakespearean mastery and magnetic film presence. But behind that grandeur was a dependency that became legendary in its own right. Barrymore's long affair with alcohol would dismantle his health, derail his career, and yet, paradoxically, secure his place in lore as one of Hollywood's most tragic figures. Barrymore's career in the 1910s and 20s soared from Broadway triumphs to silent film stardom. He brought Hamlet to life in ways that critics still marvel over, and transitioned seamlessly into talkies, where his booming voice matched his imposing presence. But even at the peak of his fame, the bottle followed him everywhere. Friends recalled rehearsals derailed by binges, sets paused while Barrymore sobered up in dressing rooms, and nights that ended in hazy taverns instead of study. As the decades rolled on, alcohol consumed more than his evenings. It consumed his talent. By the 1930s, Barrymore's once photogenic face grew puffy and worn, his memory unreliable, his speech sometimes slurred. Directors who once hailed him as a genius now hired him with trepidation, knowing scenes might take hours to capture. Rumors circulated of cue cards hidden just out of frame, desperate attempts to keep him functional. Yet even in decline, his presence remained magnetic. He could stagger into a scene and still steal it with a flash of wit, or a line delivered with lingering brilliance. The public adored him, but the toll was undeniable. His siblings Lionel and Ethel watched with sorrow as John, the most dazzling of the Barrymore dynasty, fell victim to his own appetite. By 1942, his body gave out. At 60, Barrymore was pronounced dead after years of relentless drinking. The man once hailed as America's Shakespearean giant left behind a legend split in two, a titan of art and a cautionary tale of ruin. John Barrymore's name still evokes awe, but it also reminds us how even the brightest flame can be dimmed by the slow destruction of excess. Number 11. Frances Farmer. Shock therapy and sedatives. She arrived in Hollywood with intelligence as sharp as her cheekbones, refusing to play by the rules of the studio machine. Frances Farmer was beautiful, brilliant, and uncompromising. Qualities that made her both unforgettable and, in Hollywood's rigid system, dangerously unmanageable. What began as rebellion against typecasting soon spiraled into a nightmare of institutions, sedation, and shattered potential. Farmer's breakthrough in the late 1930s promised greatness. Critics praised her performances in films like Come and Get It, calling her one of the finest young actresses of her generation. But off-screen, she refused to bend to studio demands. She bristled at publicity tours, mocked gossip columnists, and spoke her mind in ways that clashed with carefully curated star images. The press branded her difficult, and rumors of heavy drinking began to swirl. By the early 1940s, her volatility spilled into public view. She was arrested for disorderly conduct. Her mugshot splashed across newspapers. Soon after, she faced multiple court appearances, each one eroding her reputation. Instead of compassion, Hollywood distanced itself. Studios that once courted her now shut their doors, leaving Farmer vulnerable and alone. What followed was darker still. Declared mentally unstable, she was placed in psychiatric institutions where treatments of the era included harsh sedation and brutal electroshock therapy. Reports, some confirmed, others whispered, painted a picture of a woman stripped of autonomy, medicated into compliance, her once brilliant fire dulled by force. While the details remain debated, there is no doubt that the Hollywood rebel was reduced to a shadow of herself behind hospital walls. In the 1950s, Farmer resurfaced briefly, attempting a comeback with stage work and television appearances. But the spark that once promised greatness was dimmed, her body and spirit worn from years of treatment and sedation. She lived quietly until her death in 1970, at just 56, leaving behind a legacy as haunting as it was cautionary. Frances Farmer's story is one of Hollywood's darkest tragedies. A woman too strong for the system, punished until her rebellion was silenced. Her name endures as both a warning and a lament for what could have been. Number 12. Bela Lugosi, Dracula's Hidden Dependence. In 1931, Bela Lugosi stepped into the role of Dracula and forever etched himself into Hollywood history. His hypnotic stare, thick Hungarian accent, and aristocratic menace made him the definitive vampire, so convincing that he became trapped in the very shadow he created. What the world didn't see was the man behind the cape, aging, injured, and increasingly dependent on narcotics to ease his suffering. Lugosi's early career was steeped in promise. He arrived in America after the First World War, bringing with him the charisma of European theater. But while Dracula made him a star, it also typecast him. Roles became fewer and paychecks smaller, while rivals like Boris Karloff moved easily from one prestige project to the next. Lugosi, meanwhile, accepted low-budget horror films just to survive, his pride bruised with every mad scientist caricature he was forced to play. Behind the scenes, pain was a constant. Years of grueling stage work and injuries from physically demanding roles left him in agony. Doctors prescribed narcotics, and soon the medicine became a dependency. Colleagues noticed his once commanding presence dimming. The man who once dominated stages now appeared frail. His movements slowed, his voice strained. To mask the struggle, he turned increasingly to alcohol, deepening the spiral. By the 1940s, Lugosi's decline was impossible to ignore. He performed in Poverty Row productions, his name used more as a gimmick than a promise of talent. Whispers of his condition spread through Hollywood, turning the once celebrated star into a figure of pity. In 1955, in a rare moment of candor, Lugosi admitted publicly to his dependency and checked himself into a treatment facility, one of the first actors of his stature to do so. Though he found brief sobriety, his health was broken. In 1956, Bela Lugosi passed away at 73, buried in his Dracula cape at his own request. The gesture sealed his legend, but also his tragedy. A man remembered forever as a monster, even as his real demons were far more human. Bela Lugosi's story is one of irony and heartbreak, the immortal vampire undone not by a wooden stake, but by the grip of narcotics and the cruelty of Hollywood typecasting. Number 13. Dorothy Dandridge, Pills and Pressure of a Pioneer. She walked into Hollywood's golden era, carrying the weight of two impossible demands: to be both the perfect star and the first black woman allowed to shine on equal footing. Dorothy Dandridge's beauty and talent broke barriers, dazzling audiences in Carmen Jones, and earning her an Academy Award nomination. But behind the applause, she battled relentless racism, financial strain, and personal heartbreak. Pills became her quiet refuge, a way to blunt the pain of a world that applauded her on screen while denying her humanity off it. Dandridge's rise in the 1950s should have marked a new chapter for Hollywood. She had the charisma of Ava Gardner, the musicality of Lena Horne, and a magnetism that left critics spellbound. Yet opportunities were scarce. Scripts offered to her often reduced her to stereotypes, and many doors remained closed simply because of her skin color. The pressure of carrying an entire community's hopes on her shoulders was crushing. Behind the glamour, life grew increasingly turbulent. Her marriage to dancer Harold Nicholas crumbled, leaving her to raise a daughter with severe medical needs. Mounting bills and dwindling roles forced her into precarious financial situations. Friends noted how the once radiant star turned increasingly to pills, first to manage nerves, then to sleep, and eventually just to get through the day. By the early 1960s, Dandridge's career had all but collapsed. The woman who once graced magazine covers was struggling to find steady work, taking cabaret gigs and minor roles far beneath her talent. Reports circulated of erratic behavior, missed rehearsals, and a growing dependence on prescriptions. In 1965, at just 42, Dorothy Dandridge was found lifeless in her Los Angeles apartment. Officially ruled an accidental fatal mix of pills, her death echoed the struggles that had haunted her life. A woman forced to soothe her pain in silence, while the world looked the other way. Dorothy Dandridge remains a pioneer, the first black woman to stand at the gates of Hollywood stardom. Even as those gates never fully opened, her legacy is radiant, but her end reminds us of the cruel pressures and prejudices that cut short a brilliant flame. Number 14. Ava Gardner, Glamour Drowned in Gin. She was the very picture of sultry elegance, emerald eyes, raven hair, and a magnetism that made men crumble. Ava Gardner was the ultimate Hollywood siren, her beauty so commanding that MGM once declared she was the most beautiful woman ever to hit the screen. But beneath the allure, Gardner lived in torment. Failed marriages, endless scrutiny, and the loneliness of fame pushed her deeper into the glass. Gin became her solace, her constant, and ultimately her undoing. Gardner's rise was meteoric. Plucked from small-town obscurity, she became an international sensation in films like The Killers and Mogambo. Yet her personal life was a battlefield. Her marriages to Mickey Rooney, Artie Shaw, and most famously Frank Sinatra were filled with passion but also chaos. The glare of the tabloids left little room for privacy, and the heartbreaks piled higher than her box office grosses. Friends remembered nights where Gardner would drown her sorrows in tumbler after tumbler of gin, her laughter masking a gnawing despair. The glamorous goddess who captivated audiences by day was often found at night slumped over in smoky bars or alone in hotel suites, her wit sharp but her spirit eroding. Rumors swirled of violent rows, broken glasses, and mornings clouded with regret. By the 1960s, the strain began to show. Though she remained a star, her health bore the marks of her drinking. The once flawless complexion grew tired, her body slowed, her voice rasped. Roles became fewer, often overshadowed by her reputation as a hard-living, hard-drinking woman. Yet Gardner never denied it. She wore her vices openly, once quipping, "I either write the book or sell the movie rights to the gin companies." In her later years, she retreated to Spain and later London, living a quieter but no less haunted life. Strokes weakened her body, though her wit remained sharp. In 1990, at 67, Ava Gardner's legend came to an end. To the world, she was eternal glamour. But the truth was more tragic. A woman suffocated by fame, betrayed by love, and dulled by endless gin. Ava Gardner remains unforgettable, both for her beauty and for the battles she never won. Number 15. Jean Harlow, Pep Pills Under the Platinum Blonde. She was Hollywood's first true blonde bombshell, the platinum blonde who electrified the 1930s with a smile as bright as her bleached hair. Jean Harlow was the dream girl of the Depression era, playful, glamorous, and untouchable. But behind the sparkle, MGM was quietly feeding her a regimen of stimulants to keep her thin, awake, and endlessly working. Beneath the sequins and spotlight, her body was slowly breaking down. Discovered as a teenager and thrust into stardom, Harlow's rise was meteoric. Films like Red Dust and Dinner at 8 made her a household name, her sensual screen presence reshaping Hollywood's idea of femininity. But the pace was brutal. MGM worked her to exhaustion, scheduling back-to-back films and publicity appearances with little regard for her health. To keep her alert, studio doctors reportedly supplied her with pep pills, stimulants meant to sharpen her energy and curb her appetite. On screen, she glowed, but off-screen, she paid the price. Friends noticed her collapsing on set, complaining of fatigue and strange pains. Rumors circulated of fainting spells and a body weakened by a cocktail of stimulants and crash diets. Yet MGM spun it all as simple exhaustion, ensuring audiences never suspected the truth. The strain grew worse as the decade wore on. Her third marriage ended in scandal. Her health continued to decline, and whispers of mystery illnesses followed her from hospital to hospital. The radiant image of America's blonde goddess hid a woman whose kidneys were failing, whose body could no longer keep pace with the punishing cycle of pills and performance. In 1937, while filming Saratoga alongside Clark Gable, Harlow collapsed with severe abdominal pain. Within days, she was gone, just 26 years old. Officially, doctors cited kidney failure, but many believed the years of stimulants and strain had hastened her end. Jean Harlow was immortalized as the first blonde bombshell, a woman whose laughter lit up Depression-era screens. But her story is also a reminder of the cost of Hollywood's golden illusion, a starlet pushed until her body gave way, with pep pills fueling her shine and hastening her fall. Number 16. Richard Burton, a barrel of talent and booze. He was thunder in human form, a voice like molten steel, a presence that filled any room, and a talent so commanding he was hailed as one of the greatest actors of his generation. Richard Burton rose from a poor Welsh mining town to the heights of both stage and screen, but But his legend came to be defined not only by Shakespeare and Hollywood epics, but by a relentless love affair with the bottle, a battle that consumed his health and shadowed his brilliance. Burton's early years were marked by triumph. His interpretations of Hamlet and other Shakespearean roles stunned critics, while films like Cleopatra, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and Becket solidified him as a powerhouse. Yet fame magnified his excesses. Surrounded by wealth, pressure, and an audience eager for scandal, Burton leaned heavily on alcohol. Whiskey was his constant companion, often measured not in glasses but in bottles. His stormy romance with Elizabeth Taylor only heightened the spectacle. Together, they were Hollywood's most notorious couple. Fiery arguments, passionate reconciliations, and a lifestyle dripping in jewels and champagne. Tabloids breathlessly chronicled their battles. But behind the glamour, Burton's drinking escalated. Taylor herself admitted that his consumption was staggering, sometimes beginning in the morning and stretching long into the night. Directors struggled to control him. At his best, Burton could channel volcanic emotion, electrifying audiences with raw power. At his worst, he stumbled through scenes, his lines slurred, his temper frayed. Colleagues watched with equal parts awe and pity, aware that his immense gifts were being dulled by the glass. By the 1970s, his health showed the damage. His once handsome face grew swollen, his body weakened by years of excess. Doctors warned of the toll, but Burton rarely slowed down. Awards and accolades continued, yet the shadow of his drinking followed him everywhere. In 1984, at just 58, Richard Burton's heart gave out. He left behind a towering legacy of performances and a cautionary tale of brilliance eroded by dependency. Richard Burton remains immortal for his voice, his Shakespeare, and his passion. But just as famous was the barrel of booze that claimed one of the greatest actors of his age. Number 17. Robert Walker, Pills and Paranoia. In 1951, audiences watched Robert Walker give one of the most chilling performances of the era as the charmingly unhinged Bruno Antony in Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. Critics hailed him as a revelation, a star finally stepping into his full power. Yet, off-screen, Walker was already unraveling. Haunted by personal turmoil and fragile mental health, he leaned heavily on pills to steady himself. That reliance ended in tragedy, when a doctor's injection meant to calm him instead silenced him forever. Walker's early career promised greatness. Tall, boyish, and sincere, he appeared in wartime romances like Since You Went Away, winning the hearts of audiences with a blend of innocence and vulnerability. But privately, he wrestled with anxiety, emotional instability, and the bitter collapse of his marriage to actress Jennifer Jones, who left him for producer David O. Selznick. The loss devastated him, fueling feelings of paranoia and abandonment that worsened with each passing year. Hollywood's answer was medicine. Doctors prescribed sedatives to ease his nerves, then stimulants to keep him working. Soon, Walker was caught in the familiar Hollywood cycle: pills to sleep, pills to wake, pills to steady trembling hands before a scene. Friends described a man who could be radiant and funny one moment, then deeply troubled the next, his moods swinging like a pendulum. By the time of Strangers on a Train, Walker had poured his turmoil into Bruno Antony, channeling his own fractured psyche into the role. But the acclaim could not save him from his decline. In August 1951, gripped by paranoia and agitation, Walker's doctor administered an injection of a strong sedative. Combined with the medications already in his system, the dose proved fatal. At just 32, Robert Walker was gone. The sudden death shocked Hollywood. How could a man so full of promise, fresh from a career-defining performance, vanish overnight? For many, it was another reminder of the industry's dark underbelly, where fragile souls were medicated into silence rather than nurtured. Robert Walker's brief career remains frozen in time. His Bruno still mesmerizes, eerie, and unforgettable. But his real-life story was one of pills, paranoia, and a prescription that ended a future that had only just begun. Hollywood's golden glow hid shadows of bottles, pills, and broken hearts, yet their stories still echo across the silver screen. Share your memories below. Which ones shocked you the most? And subscribe for more untold tales of the stars who gave us magic while carrying burdens we never saw.